What now? Prince Zuko asked as he stepped on the deck. Before anyone had time to answer, the chaos around him registered. Looking around, it wasn't hard to guess what had caused the noise. Zuko hadn't ordered the catapult to be put on the ready, but it was up on the deck nonetheless. What was left of it, anyway. Who did this? Zuko's brow furrowed. Most of the crew was there, probably having came to see what had exploded. Now they were busy looking innocent and avoiding his gaze. That's it. Are you telling me that no one saw anything? Because this thing did not break on its own, Zuko shouted. Either his crew was more incompetent than he had realized, or they were all in this together. Sir? Lieutenant G took a few steps toward him, a stern look on his face. I take full responsibility for this. That took Zuko by surprise. Before the prince answered anything, he made sure his voice sounded calmer. He had promised Uncle. Okay, but you didn't do this, right? Zuko needed to be sure. No, sir, but it shouldn't have happened under my watch. Zuko felt like retorting, got that right, but he didn't. He was at least as much to blame for this as the lieutenant was. I should be the one apologizing to them. I shouldn't have let this happen, not on my ship. Zuko would get to the bottom of this. The positive thing was no one had been seriously injured in the explosion. The catapult was beyond repair, but the explosion hadn't damaged the ship's hull or any other vital elements, which was almost something to be grateful for. In Iroh's opinion, this was far too fortunate to be a coincidence. The saboteur was clearly familiar with explosives. Also, he had no intention of killing them all. That was truly positive, at least. The catapult had no significance in getting them to safety, so losing it was nowhere near as problematic as losing the engine had been. The worrying part was they had no idea who had destroyed the catapult, or even how he had managed the deed. There was no explosives aboard the ship, so either someone had smuggled them aboard, or they had used advanced firebending. If the answer was the latter, it would certainly narrow down the list of suspects, but a bit too much so. Iroh didn't believe anyone other than he or his nephew had the raw power and finesse to pull off something like this. Zuko was even more moody and quiet than he had been earlier, which was quite an achievement, really. The boy blamed himself for not having caught this saboteur before they had struck again. The prince was now going through the wreckage of the catapult, trying to find anything that might give them a better idea of who was behind these attacks. The rain was pouring harder by the minute, and Iroh could hear the thunder in the distance. They were running out of time. Another attack so soon in such a public place was bound to raise suspicion, which meant that either their saboteur was getting worried he was about to be caught, and had decided to act when he still could, or he was getting cocky. Needless to say, anyone aboard was now aware that they had a saboteur among them, and the general mood was only slightly less gloomy than his nephew's. No one wanted to believe that one of their own had endangered everyone on the ship. Iroh did his best to keep up some sort of team spirit. Everyone suspected everyone wouldn't get them anywhere. Zuko walked away from the wreckage, and Iroh joined him. Knowing his nephew was in no mood for small talk, Iroh cut straight to the chase. Anything new? Zuko looked up thoughtful and distracted. He sighed and turned to look at Uncle. Nothing. Nothing on the catapult, anyway. I think I figured out how he did it, though. Iroh nodded to let Zuko know to go on. On an ordinary day, they may have lowered their voices to make sure they wouldn't be overheard, but right now the wind and the rain saw to that their secrets were safe. Whoever did this, I don't think they used explosives. I suspect that they rigged the catapult, set it to fire using the same tar we used to light the ammo, and launched it while the hatch in the deck was only partially opened. The result was loud, smoky, and destructive enough to pass for an explosion. Damn, so much for my theory that saboteur being an explosive expert, or concerned for everyone's well-being. Perhaps the man had intended to sink them all after all. As Zuko spoke, he raised his arms to demonstrate his words. Something about the way he moved his left arm caught Iroh's attention. Prince Zuko, are you injured? Iroh asked, but didn't wait for an answer. He grabbed his nephew's hand into his, but let go of almost immediately as Zuko winced. I had twisted my shoulder when lifting some torn metal. It's an old injury. It's not a big deal. Zuko tried to shrug him off, but Iroh held his ground. You should have Sergeant Cho take a look at it. Zuko rolled his eyes. I'm fine, really. Zuko was about to walk away, but Uncle stopped him. No, nephew. You may be captain of this ship and the one giving orders around here, but I'm your uncle. Worrying is part of the job description. Do your old relative a favor and go see Sergeant Cho, right now. Zuko sighed. So typical of Uncle to quibble over unimportant details. Zuko hadn't mentioned his shoulder injury before now because it was healing on its own, and all in all he didn't feel like telling anyone how he'd gotten his ass kicked by a 12-year-old that wasn't even the Avatar. Besides, for the safety of everyone aboard, finding out who was trying to sink them had to be priority. All else came a distant second. The problem was Zuko still had no idea who the saboteur was, or what to do next to find him. Truthfully, one option did come to mind, but using the power of dragons had its risk. As long as he had no clue regarding the saboteur's identity, his only option would be to go over the whole crew one at a time until he found the culprit. At that point, he might as well make a big speech to the whole crew about his secret illegal bending power, since even the slowest of the crew members would have figured out his secret by then. Not the biggest secret he was keeping from them right now, but big enough to be bad news if the information went straight back to Zhao. On another day, Zuko may have thought he could trust his crew to keep its secrets, but not today. Today he was in short supply of trust. Zuko pinched the bridge of his nose. He felt useless, and uselessness irritated him even more than the fact that his ship had been robbed of his weapons capabilities. It's not a good idea, nephew, Uncle suddenly said. The risks are too great. You are not yet in immediate danger, and for all we know, catching you using the power of dragons is the saboteur's endgame. And here I'm supposed to be the one who can read minds, Zuko thought wearily. But Uncle was right, of course. With Zhao already on to him, they couldn't be too careful, and the last thing Zuko wanted to do was play straight into Zhao's hands. Even going to the medical bay was better than sitting around doing nothing, so Zuko told his uncle he would go down to see Cho. There was no room for a real medical bay aboard the ship. They'd call the small storage room where the healing herbs were kept the medical bay. Sergeant Cho wasn't a professional healer, but he was the one everyone turned to when they were hurt or ill. Zuko didn't know if Cho would be in the medical bay, but it was as good a place as any to start looking for him. The conversation he and Uncle had had before the latest attack was still playing over in his head. Air? Me? Uncle must be mistaken. Master Kurta had said that every living thing had each of the 4 elements in them. Zuko had always presumed that since he was a firebender, and fire was his number 1 element, the other elements had small significance to his life. If there was more to the other elements in him than he realized, Zuko would have gathered Earth would be his number 2. He fought Earthbenders, and could respect the way they stood their ground, never giving up without a fight. Earth was stubborn, but it was also about patience and waiting for the right time, and that didn't really sound like Zuko at all. So maybe not Earth then. Despite having lived on a ship for 3 years, Zuko didn't really relate to water. There was something natural and useful about the way it flowed, constantly changed position like a skilled swordsman, but water always felt cold and lifeless. On the other hand, maybe he had become more like water of late. It was a strange thought, but he had heard water was the element of change, and he had changed a great deal. Then there was air, the element of attachment and spirituality, and if the Avatar is a good example, gimmick kicks. Not that Zuko had anything against gimmick kicks. Basic techniques were the most useful ones, but they were a bit boring. An airy kick was more important to him than a steady root stance on any day of the week. Detachment and letting go had never been easy for Zuko, but they had become easier since he turned into a dragon. Now that he could fly, he found himself enjoying that a great deal. He'd never been afraid of heights to begin with, and he certainly felt more at home in the sky than underground. Zuko could move soundlessly, like he hadn't even touched the ground. He had practiced hard to become as sneaky as he was, but it had never been difficult to feel unnatural to him, and Kurta had always said many of his teachings in the order had been derived directly from airbending. The Blue Spirit isn't a bender, but if he was, I don't think he would be a firebender. Kurta had said air was about deception, and Zuko believed he was right. The Avatar was good at deceiving people and had little moral scruples over it. Zuko wasn't like that, but he couldn't deny that he had many secrets. Maybe deception was more complicated than just lying effortlessly. Air was freedom. Zuko had never been free of his responsibilities as a prince, and he doubted he would ever be. He doubted he ever wanted to be. His responsibilities were a part of him and made him who he was. So that didn't fit. Not unless freedom meant something more than the lack of responsibilities. Suddenly one of Uncle's many sayings came to mind. Freedom is the freedom to choose the amount of your responsibilities. That interpretation did make more sense that the airbenders were irresponsible prats at the time, but what did it mean to Zuko? I'm not free to choose my amount of responsibilities. Or am I? Fire and air had more in common than Zuko had first realized. But in essence, they were still different. Air was flowy and free. Fire was straightforward and disciplined. That said, Zuko's firebending has always been, ever since he was a child, been different from standard firebending. It was a flaw he tried to correct all of his life, because his father had said it made his bending weak. In the end, Zuko had never had the patience to completely correct his flawed way of bending. A flowy version of a kata often came easier to him than the textbook one, and so it had more power behind it. His father asked for power and perfection in everything, but since Zuko couldn't do both, he had hoped power mattered more than perfection. He preferred to create an impressive amount of flames with a flawed kata than rather a less amount of fire with a perfect one. But what if his father had been wrong? What if the fact that Zuko's bending was different didn't mean he was a bad bender? Kurta had taught that a great bender embraced all his sides to achieve his true potential. Elements are their strongest when working together. Alone, no one element is greater than the other. Zuko's style wasn't perfect firebending, but maybe that was okay, because he himself wasn't just fire. The more Zuko thought about it, the more he felt like his style of bending was a mixture of fire and air, and earth, and even a bit of water. The dragon style. Of course, it was silly to think in this way. The Fire Lord was right. Except that Zuko didn't really believe that. Not anymore, and maybe hadn't for years. The whole point of my quest is to prove that he was wrong about me. Zuko reached the medical bay. He knocked. "Come in," Sergeant Cho's voice called from behind the metal door. Zuko opened the door and stepped in. Cho came to view from behind a movable screen and greeted him with a bow. "Prince Zuko, what can I do for you?" "I hurt my shoulder about 5 days ago. It's been healing well, but now it's hurting again." Normally I would ask the patient to put any strain on his mending limb, but knowing you, of course you have. Let me take a look." Cho's attitude was bordering on insolent, but Zuko wasn't bothered by that. On the contrary, it was nice to change from everyone else's scared of my life attitude. "Wait a second. Does this mean I've grown a sense of humor?" The sergeant did a few simple movement tests while Zuko sat on a mattress. Eventually, the man concluded when Zuko had already known. The arm would be fine as long as he didn't put any more strain on it. "Is that it?" "Not quite. I'm going to mix an ointment that alleviates the pain and helps the recovery along. I don't mind the pain. There are other places I should. It'll only take a few seconds." Zuko crossed his arms but made no further attempts to flee. Cho turned his back on Zuko and started grinding some herbs. Despite the storm raging outside, in the absence of the engine's roar, the medical bay was quieter than usual. The silence wasn't a soothing one, though. The storm is upon us, and we still don't have an engine fixed. Zuko could hear a slow breathing from somewhere nearby. There was a third person in the room, behind the screen. "I didn't realize you already had a patient," Zuko commented. "Who is it? I thought no one was injured in the explosion." "No one was," the older man said without turning to look at him. "There has been a disease that's been going around in the harbor towns. It's like a severe version of the common cold. The symptoms include a high fever and even hallucinations. No need to worry, though. Only one crew member is showing symptoms, and I got the situation contained here. Sergeant Geary is responding well to the medicine I gave him a few hours ago, so he should be up and about in a day or two." Something about the statement didn't quite add up in Zuko's mind. Wait, I ran into Sergeant Jerry not 2 hours ago and gave him a task to go and ask around if anyone had been to the engine room. If he is ill now, anyone aboard could have caught what he has. I wouldn't call that contained. Sergeant Cho turned to look at the prince and had an astonished expression on his face. Sir, you must be mistaken. Sergeant Jerry has been ill all day, and I wouldn't have allowed a patient to wander off. Not that he would ever could in his current state. I think you're getting names mixed up. Zuko was on his feet again. He pulled the screen aside just to be sure. Sergeant Jerry was laying on the mattress. His eyes were closed and his lips were moving inaudibly. The man was only semi-conscious. Prince Zuko, be careful! You don't want to catch what he has. Catching a cold is the least of my worries. Zuko ran out of the room. There was someone, or maybe something he had to find. There were 2 Sergeant Jerrys aboard the ship. Zuko knew it was impossible, but it was the only explanation he could think of. Maybe it was due time he stopped trusting what he knew to be possible, and started looking at all the possibilities. He reached the deck of the ship. Hard rain beated down on his face, and high waves crashed against the ship from both sides. Zuko was relatively sure Sergeant Jerry had been among the crowd of the crew members who had gathered to examine the remains of the catapult. Now there were only a handful of people on deck. The rest must have sought shelter down below. Zuko looked frantically around. No Sergeant Jerry. Walking up to a group of 3 men and asked, "Where did Sergeant Jerry go?" Seaman Oki looked thoughtful. "I don't know, sir. I'm not sure if I've seen Jerry all day." Lieutenant G put in, "Sergeant Jerry is ill, sir. I'm sorry that you haven't been informed of this sooner, but there had been so much going on." "Not that Sergeant Jerry." Zuko pinched the bridge of his nose, trying to rein in his irritation. It wasn't their fault they weren't following his line of thinking. Heck, Zuko was still having a hard time following it. "Nephew, what are you doing?" Ao's voice came from behind him. And of course, Uncle had to show up right now and presume the worst. Zuko had been behaving himself. He really had. But this was an emergency. There was no time to be polite about it. The prince took a deep breath to calm himself before turning to face his uncle. Prince Zuko was angry, more angry than usual, but Lieutenant G wasn't sure what had brought this mood on this time. One way or another, G was glad Iroh was here. The lieutenant was used to dealing with the prince, but lately the boy had been different. G would never have admitted it, but he had been a bit intimidated by the teenager. It was weird. The boy hadn't picked a fight with anyone or yelled more than usual. On the contrary, where the old Zuko would have yelled or firebended at them, or both, this new Zuko just cocked his head and looked at you like you were something edible. While Zuko was taking deep breaths, Iroh walked up to them. The crew members each gave a nod and turned to acknowledge the old general. Zuko sprang into motion. Before G had time to know what had happened, the young prince turned around, grabbed Iroh's hand, and pulled the man forward and locked one of Iroh's hands behind his back. G didn't have time to protest before Iroh freed himself. The general shoved the boy with his free hand and managed to twist free of Zuko's grip. He took a few steps away from the boy. "Prince Zuko, what do you think you're doing?" the lieutenant shouted. "How dare you attack your honored uncle? What's gone into you?" The prince looked unapologetic and annoyed G's words. Normally this kind of behavior would have made G's blood boil, but the look on Prince Zuko's face was enough to silence him. Instead of anger, he felt fear. What's going on? "Who are you?" Prince Zuko asked from Iroh. His question sounded more like a command, his tone leaving no room for debate. "You know who I am." Iroh's tone was reasonable, considering the circumstances. Zuko snarled, "Stop playing games. I know you're not my uncle." "I don't know what you're talking. Stop lying! You may look and sound like my uncle, but you don't walk like him. Did you really think I wouldn't recognize my own uncle's footsteps?" The boy had finally lost it, G thought to himself. To his surprise, Ao didn't try to reason with the crazy teenager. He simply stood there, looking thoughtful. What's he going to do? I mean, the prince is acting like a madman. But he's still Iroh's nephew.
Show yourself.
Zuko's voice was a low growl. Iroh smiled at the boy, but the look was somehow completely out of place on the old man's face. There was something playful and vicious about that smile. Very well. When Lieutenant G had thought the day couldn't get any weirder, it did exactly that. Before Zuko's eyes, the thing that had only moments ago been the spitting image of his uncle started to change. It grew taller and leaner in a matter of seconds. Iroh's gray hair grew longer and changed color into pitch black. Everyone watched in shock, since as the creature changed its form, the creature was only halfway through its transformation. But Zuko could already tell more or less what it looked like. It was taller than a human, but definitely a humanoid. Without warning, the shapeshifter lunged forward. Zuko dodged the attack by diving left and throwing a small firebolt at the being. From this distance, the fire would have hit the creature, but it didn't. Whatever it is, it's fast. The crew members present tried to help the prince stop the shapeshifter, but the creature tackled them to the ground. Zuko got back on his feet and threw more firebolts and did a few rotation kicks right after. Fast or not, no one can dodge a big enough barrage. The creature whirled around and was somehow able to dance past every attack the young firebender sent his way. Each time Zuko got closer, the shapeshifter took a few graceful leaps and was again out of Zuko's range. What is it? Zuko decided to try something different. He took one of his hidden knives from his boot and threw it at the thing. For a moment, he thought the knife would hit home, but at the same moment, the creature grabbed the knife from midair, turned 180 degrees and hurled the knife back at Zuko. Zuko rolled out of the way, got up on his hands and kicked with both of his feet. The bolt was too big, the creature wasn't able to get out of his way. The fire singed the shapeshifter's right arm. It hissed in irritation, revealing its sharp teeth. Zuko needed a plan, but more importantly, he didn't know what he was up against. What do I know about my adversary? Zuko wondered while keeping up his pursuit of the creature. He's fast, he's a shapeshifter, he wants to hurt me. What else? He's a spirit. Nothing of this world moves like that. He moves like he's dancing, but not the way the Avatar does. He runs and twists and turns, but he doesn't jump. That's it, the element of change. Zuko had never fought a spirit before, but he had fought waterbenders. Let's hope the same rules apply when fighting a water spirit. Basic techniques were too simple. The spirit saw them coming. Zuko tried something unconventional instead. You think that because I'm a firebender, my attacks will be straightforward. Let's see what you think about this one. Zuko threw a long, thin stream of fire at the creature. The spirit flowed out of the way as before. Zuko wasn't done yet, though. He had invented this move himself a few weeks back, but hadn't had a chance to use it in a fight before. He had gotten the inspiration for the attack from the way Katara used the same water for more than one attack. If it works with water, why not with fire? Instead of letting his fire dissipate as it passed its target, Zuko held on to it. It took a great deal of concentration to keep the fire alive and under his control when it was so far from him, but he was determined to make this work. Zuko whirled his hands in front of him like he had seen Katara do when calling back her water. The fire obeyed his will and headed back toward him. Spirit noticed something was going on the moment too late. Zuko ended his kata by thrusting his right palm in front of his body. The fire changed direction once again. Now the Zuko will was no longer holding the fire steady. It sped in the direction Zuko's hand had shot it, straight toward the spirit. The hit threw the creature off his feet. Zuko didn't waste any time. He ran up to the thing. The spirit got up, but instead of running away, it finally charged at Zuko. Soon the prince found himself in hand-to-hand combat with it. Only now he realized just how tall the spirit was. Although humanoid, its long limbs appeared to be able to reach him from the unlikeliest of angles. Zuko had enough. He was determined to end this. The prince jumped high in the air and whirled a wide kick, forcing the spirit down. As Zuko prepared his finishing blow, the spirit grabbed the boy's fist in its bony, webbed hand. When the hit Zuko had been charging his fist met with the spirit's icy, cold hand, the result was a small explosion. Zuko flew across the deck, but managed to orient himself in the air so that he landed on his feet. He still glided a few meters on the wet deck, crouching down, ready for whatever the spirit would throw at him next. The explosion had thrown the spirit to the other side of the deck. It too landed in a crouch. For the moment, the two stared at one another, and the spirit laughed. "Looks like fire and water don't mix well. Who knew?" For the first time, Zuko got a good look at the spirit. The creature was human-like on a quick glance, but a closer look revealed a myriad of inhuman qualities. Its skin was pale and translucent. You could see blue veins underneath it, and it looked like it had never seen sunlight. In stark contrast to its white skin, the spirit's hair was pitch black and tangled in wavy dreadlocks that reminded Zuko of a thick bush of seaweed. The spirit was wearing black battle trousers, but no shoes or a shirt. Apparently it could change outfits as easily as it could change appearances. The spirit's eyes were a unnaturally piercing shade of blue. "You did this! You sabotaged my ship!" Zuko shouted over the howling wind. "Why? Why are you trying to hurt us?" The water spirit rolled his eyes. "You humans take everything so personally. I'm here because I was curious to see what was so special about one small human that caught the attention of the spirit realm." The spirit's nonchalant attitude took Zuko by surprise. He composed himself and took a few steps toward it, all the while keeping his guard up, ready to create fire. Instead of matching Zuko's battle stance, the spirit got up from its crouch, rising to its full height of about 2 meters. Its body was nothing but skin and bone and muscle. The creature's fingernails were tall and skinny like talons. Zuko made a mental note to keep clear of them. Between its fingers and toes, the spirit had fins, and on its neck had gills. "A creature of water," Zuko confirmed. All in all, as disturbing as the spirit appearance was, it was almost handsome in a creepy, inhuman way. "And now that we are doing the explain my evil plan thing, I should probably tell you that I originally came to look for the Avatar, not you. However, the latest incarnation of the spirit of the world turned out to be quite a bore. He's so young and so air nomad, and trust me, when you met one of them, you met them all. You're much more interesting." The spirit looked around itself. Lieutenant G and the rest of the crew present had gotten their act together and were circling around the spirit. Zuko signaled them to keep their distance for now. They appeared eager to obey his command. More crew members entered the deck, alarmed by the sounds of fighting. From the corner of his eye, the prince saw Uncle among them. Zuko wanted badly to exchange a few words with him about all this, but now was not the time. Uncle took a step toward the spirit. He wasn't in a fighting stance. Instead, he had his hands tucked within his sleeves. "Respected water spirit," Uncle addressed the creature. His words polite, but his tone hard. "Have we done something to offend you?" The spirit looked bemused. "Hardly." "Are you attacking us because you're water and we're Fire Nation?" Zuko speculated. "How can you say such a thing?" The spirit feigned, looking insulted. "You think me a racist? Because I'm not. I care equally little for the people of water and fire alike. All people, really." "Then what do you want from us?" Zuko started to lose his patience. "You dare hear me say people, right?" A vicious, knowing smile crossed the spirit's face. "That word really doesn't apply to you anymore, does it?" "It knows." The spirit laughed. "Please don't tell me you actually thought you could just casually turn into a dragon and still fly under everyone's radar. You know what they say, with great power comes great enemies." "So it's me you're trying to kill?" Zuko bit his lip. "Still taking it personally, are we?" "Of course I'm not. Killing is so intimate, and we barely know each other. I don't think our relationship is quite there yet," the spirit joked. "We are at the courtship period at best." "If you're not trying to kill us, why did you trap us in this storm?" As if to emphasize Zuko's words, a lightning flashed across the sky. The spirit cocked its head, finally looking serious. Because I can. And where's the fun in playing it safe anyway? This isn't a game! Oh, yes it is, the spirit said. But I wouldn't expect a pawn like you to see your part in it. A massive wave crashed against the side of the ship. Zuko had to grab hold of railing to stay on his feet. Zuko turned back to look at the spirit. The storm drowned out its next words, but the prince could read its lips. Until we meet again. In one easy motion, the spirit climbed over the railing and jumped. Zuko ran to the railing, but couldn't see anything in the stormy water. Good riddance. Zuko had more pressing matters to take care of. The prince turned to address his crew. We can get through this. After what you've been through, this little storm has nothing on us. We're going to make it. After that, Zuko started handing out orders. Even without the engine working, they still had some steering capabilities. Uncle suggested they should head for the eye of the storm. Zuko trusted his judgment on the matter. The sun began to shine and the winds calmed down. The eye. Zuko realized, Uncle, you're a genius. Something big burst out of the water not too far from the ship. He's back, Zuko thought, and took a fire-bending stance. But it wasn't the spirit. It was the Avatar. Zuko looked at the bison as it flew further from them. He felt oddly disinterested about the fact that the Avatar once again getting away. Uncle was next to him and placed his hand on Zuko's shoulder. The engine? Zuko asked without turning to look at the older man. Should be operational very soon. Zuko nodded. We'll head for the shore as soon as it's safe to do so. You did well, nephew, Iroh said. I should have figured it out sooner, Zuko began, but was cut off by Iroh. No, Prince Zuko. It is I who should have seen a spirit's handiwork in this. It was you who exposed the saboteur and fought him off. It could still come back. I'll be sure to prepare a ritual or two that ought to keep uninvited spirits away from the ship. Though I doubt the Namaki is coming back. So the creature has a name? Why wouldn't it? Zuko asked. We've been traveling the seas a long time, and never has a spirit, mighty or small, attacked us this openly. I imagine it takes great need or great power for a spirit to do so. Nakis live in dangerous waters, rapids, waterfalls, and such. I suspect that they are at the strongest where the waters move fastest. Still, even with the full power of the storm to power it, the spirit wasn't able to best you. And the spirit knows this as well. This was a scouting trip? Zuko realized. Just testing the ice. But for what? Iroh looked thoughtful and serious. I'm not sure. The motives of spirits aren't always easy to see, and when dealing with a spirit specializing in deception, I don't think we can put much weight on the vague excuses Naki gave us. I fear the spirit might not have been working alone, though. We must keep our eyes and other senses open for more signs of spiritual activity from now on. Zuko thought about that, but found a flaw in Uncle's logic. I know next to nothing about spirits. I mean, as a kid I heard all sorts of interesting tales, but when it comes to dealing with real spirits, I have so far been acting on a hunch. A state of affairs we are sure to remedy as soon as possible, Iroh assured him. Zuko nodded, but there was little more than he needed to say. The spirit knew what I am, and said as much in front of the whole crew. What should I do? I'm sure it will work out, Uncle told him. All will look better tomorrow. You'll see. The next morning there wasn't a cloud in the sky. The storm was a distant memory. They had anchored as soon as the engine had been operational again. Still, Zuko didn't want to put extra stress on it just yet. They would continue their journey once it was safe. I think we've had enough life-threatening situations for one day. Sir? Lieutenant G bowed deeply at the young man. We are done going over the ship, sir. There are no hidden damages or booby traps that we could find. Zuko nodded. He trusted G's judgment on the matter. Sir? Lieutenant continued. I apologize for my behavior yesterday. I shouldn't have questioned your methods of looking for a saboteur. You are right to be suspicious of everyone. No, Zuko said, and turned to face the lieutenant. If I had coordinated my search with you, we might have caught this spirit much earlier. G looked surprised, but bowed again. Yep, should definitely give positive feedback more often, Zuko thought. G had already turned to leave when he stopped and added, One more thing, sir. Zuko had expected this. There was, after all, only so long a dragon could fly under radar. Yes, Lieutenant? We're glad to have you back, sir. No matter what anyone says, it's a privilege to serve under you. Now it was Zuko's turn to look surprised. He didn't know what to say to that. G bowed again, and Zuko bowed back at him. The part about Zuko's investigation that bothered G the most was that the prince had left him out of the loop. G had worried that the prince wasn't making the safety of his crew a priority, but was after petty vengeance instead. The only thing worse than an incompetent leader is a callous one, G thought to himself. Zuko had proven G's doubts unfounded. G wanted to let the young men know that the crew appreciated his lengths he had gone to keep them safe. Prince Zuko had often difficult, quick-tempered, and even a bit scary at times, but when it really mattered, the young men had never let his crew down, and G and the crew would never let him down. Your secrets are safe with us, should you ever choose to reveal them.